7 words. That was all it took to stop a bullet from shattering Alfonso Rizzo's skull in the private room of the Velvet Vault. A folded document slid across the lacquered card table, its delicate rice paper crackling like static electricity before landing in front of the waitress with the forgettable face. The room went still, that crystalline, airless silence that tastes like aged whiskey and imminent violence. Alfonso didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he stared at the trembling girl balancing a tray of champagne flutes, a mocking grin carving into his features. He thought she was just scenery. He thought she was background noise. "If you're so clever, then translate it," he sneered, gesturing toward the stone-faced Japanese investor whose bodyguard's hand had just disappeared beneath his jacket. "Tell me what this says before someone here stops breathing." He expected her to freeze. He didn't expect her to dismantle his entire worldview in fluent Kansai Ben dialect. Did you catch that? A waitress who just stopped a bullet with nothing but words. If you're listening right now, you need to understand something. This isn't just another mob story. This is about a brilliant woman forced to hide her genius, serving champagne to killers who have no idea they're standing next to someone who could decrypt their darkest secrets. My analytics tell me 84% of you aren't subscribed yet. But if you want to witness what happens when the smartest person in the room is also the most invisible, hit that subscribe button now. Because Maisie's about to prove that in the world of organized crime, the deadliest weapon isn't a gun, it's a mind that refuses to stay hidden. Now let me take you into the depths of Chicago's underworld. Chicago doesn't forgive, but it definitely forgets, especially at 2:47 a.m. in the bowels of River North, where the elevators descend below street level and the air smells like cigar smoke and laundered money. Maisie Mellor tugged at her black cocktail apron, the cheap polyester scratching against the burn scar on her wrist she'd gotten 3 years ago in a different life. She wasn't supposed to be here. By every rational calculation, a 28-year-old former NSA cryptographer with a master's degree in computational linguistics from MIT should be teaching undergrads, or at minimum sleeping in a bed that didn't creak. Instead, she was refilling ashtrays at the Velvet Vault, a members-only casino that existed only in whispers and required a blood test to enter. Maisie needed to disappear. Her younger brother's witness protection placement depended on her staying dead to the intelligence community, and her savings from her old life had evaporated the moment she'd blown the whistle on Operation Nightfall. So she became a ghost. That was the cardinal rule of the vault. You are not staff. You're a shadow with a serving tray. Table 7 needs service. The Cristal. The 2002. Carlo, the floor supervisor, a wiry man who chain-smoked parliaments and had a tell when he was lying, muttered from the corner of his mouth. "And Mellor, for Christ's sake, keep your head down. Mr. Rizzo's got company. The kind that doesn't appreciate witnesses. Alfonso Rizzo." Even the slot machines seemed to quiet when his name echoed through the room. The Tribune called him a tech entrepreneur and philanthropist. The sealed federal indictment Maisie had accidentally seen on a server 2 jobs ago called him the architect of the Rizzo family's digital empire, a man who'd modernized organized crime with blockchain currencies and encrypted kill orders. He wasn't your grandfather's mobster counting cash in a social club. Alfonso Rizzo wore custom brioni, spoke 4 languages, and eliminated problems with the efficiency of an algorithm. Maisie took the champagne bottle. Understood. She moved through the smoke-hazed room, past walls upholstered in burgundy velvet designed to swallow sound, designed to bury confessions. At table 7, the tension was a living thing. Alfonso Rizzo sat at the head, his posture deceptively casual, but coiled like a viper sunbathing on warm concrete. He was unsettlingly handsome in a dangerous, symmetrical way, dark hair swept back with product, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of good scotch that missed nothing. Maisie had perfected the art of intellectual camouflage by her 3rd week at the vault. It required a specific type of muscle memory, the deliberate slouch of her shoulders, the carefully vacant expression she'd practiced in the bathroom mirror until her face forgot how to show recognition. When high rollers discussed merger acquisitions in Mandarin, she refilled their water glasses with the blank attentiveness of a golden retriever. When they argued about cryptocurrency vulnerabilities in Russian, she smiled politely and asked if they needed more ice. The trick was in the eyes. Never let them focus. Never let them sharpen with comprehension. Even when a banker at table 3 casually mentioned the exact blockchain exploit she'd warned her former supervisor about 18 months before they'd tried to bury her testimony. Even when a lobbyist at the bar accidentally quoted her own classified briefing on encrypted communications protocols, she simply nodded and wiped down the mahogany with practiced, rhythmic strokes. Her mind, however, refused to cooperate with the performance. While her hands stacked chips and her mouth murmured pleasantries, her brain was solving equations she hadn't been asked to touch. She'd catch herself mentally decrypting the alphanumeric codes on the security badges the vault's management wore, or mapping the probability distributions of the roulette wheel's manufacturing defect, a 0.3% bias toward Black 17 she'd noticed in week 1. It was exhausting, this constant division between what she knew and what she was allowed to reveal. Her studio apartment in Pilsen told the real story. Textbooks she'd smuggled from her old life lined the walls in precarious towers, volumes on cryptanalysis, quantum computing theory, and dead languages she'd taught herself during grad school insomnia. Her laptop, purchased cash at a pawn shop and scrubbed of anything resembling metadata, held precisely 4 bookmarks: her brother's secure messaging protocol, a tutorial on penetration testing she read for comfort, and 2 job listings for computational linguists she'd never applied to because her social security number triggered federal alerts. Some nights, after her shift ended and the sun threatened the horizon, Maisie would sit on her fire escape and solve century-old ciphers for fun: the Voynich manuscript, the zodiac letters, anything to remind herself that her brain still worked, still mattered. Even if she spent 8 hours pretending it didn't exist. The only thing more dangerous than being smart, her mother had once told her, was letting the wrong people know it. Maisie was about to learn her mother had been tragically correct. Alfonso Rizzo didn't believe in coincidences, which was why the waitress bothered him like a splinter lodged beneath expensive skin. He'd started noticing her 3 days after the incident with the Japanese investors, the way she moved through the vault's geography with the efficiency of someone who'd memorized traffic patterns, the microscopic hesitation before she feigned confusion when addressed in anything other than English. Most telling was what happened when Dmitry Volkov had knocked over his bourbon while discussing a server farm acquisition in Kiev. The liquid had splashed across a cocktail napkin covered in Volkov's handwritten notes, and for exactly 1.2 seconds, Alfonso had watched her eyes lock onto the Cyrillic characters with the focused intensity of someone reading, not observing. Then the mask had slammed back down. The vapid smile. The apologetic murmuring. The performance. He'd assigned his best digital investigator to her that same night. Marco returned 6 hours later looking like he'd seen a ghost, which in a sense he had. "There's nothing, boss." Marco had spread printouts across Alfonso's desk in his penthouse office overlooking the Chicago River. Maisie Meller. Age 28. Social security number checks out. Tax returns are boring. 1 speeding ticket in 2023. But it's too clean. Like someone built her from a template. Alfonso had leaned forward, his interest sharpening to a point. Explain. No college transcripts. No social media footprint before 3 years ago. Her references from previous jobs all lead to disconnected numbers or businesses that folded exactly 6 months after she left. Her bank account shows deposits and withdrawals that match her pay stubs perfectly. Nobody's finances are that consistent. And here's the weird part. Marco had tapped a photograph. Facial recognition pulls nothing. Not on any database, federal or private. She doesn't exist before 2022. Alfonso had run his own searches after Marco left, using resources that would have terrified his IT specialist. He'd found the same void, the same deliberate absence of data that screamed intelligence community scrub protocol. Someone had erased her, or she'd erased herself, and they'd done it with the kind of precision that required institutional knowledge. He'd started watching her differently after that. Not as furniture, but as a puzzle box wrapped in a polyester apron. The way she never flinched when gunfire echoed from the private rooms upstairs, suggesting familiarity rather than shock. How she held champagne bottles with the exact grip someone trained in weapon retention would use. The micro-expressions she suppressed when conversations veered toward encryption standards or signals intelligence. She was hiding something extraordinary, and Alfonso Rizzo had built an empire on extracting extraordinary things from unwilling containers. The summons came during her Thursday shift, delivered by Carlo with the kind of pale-faced dread usually reserved for terminal diagnoses. "Mr. Rizzo wants to see you. Upstairs." Now. Maisie's heart performed a complicated arrhythmia, but her face remained carefully neutral. She untied her apron with steady hands, mentally cataloging exit routes and calculating the probability that she'd need them. The vault's upper floor was restricted territory, where the real business happened, where people went and sometimes didn't come back. Alfonso's private office was a study in controlled opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's glittering sprawl, and the furniture was the kind of minimalist expensive that whispered rather than shouted. He sat behind a glass desk, fingers steepled, watching her with the patient intensity of a scientist observing a specimen. "Sit." She sat. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, surveillance stills of her brother leaving his community college in Wisconsin, time-stamped from yesterday. Her blood turned to permafrost. "Ethan's doing well," Alfonso said conversationally, as though discussing weather patterns. "Criminal justice major. Decent grades." Completely unaware that his sister is a ghost running from a three-letter agency that still has active warrants for her arrest on espionage charges. Maisie's composure finally cracked, just slightly. "What do you want?" "The same thing you want. Safety." He opened his laptop, turned it toward her. The screen displayed encrypted communications, military-grade cipher protocols she recognized from her NSA days. "My competitors have upgraded their security infrastructure. Someone's selling them tools that shouldn't exist outside government labs. I need to know what they're saying, what they're planning, and who's arming them with toys from your old playground. I'm a waitress. You're a former cryptographer who broke the Sandstorm encryption during Operation Nightfall, then disappeared when you realized your superiors were selling that same technology to foreign actors." His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I do my research, Maisie. Or should I call you by your real name?" The silence stretched like piano wire. "Here's my offer," Alfonso continued. "You decrypt my problems, I make yours disappear. New identity, legitimate this time. Your brother stays safe, stays ignorant, stays alive. You get to stop pretending to be stupid, and I get to stop watching my empire crumble because I'm functionally illiterate in the language of modern warfare." Maisie stared at the encrypted files, at her brother's photograph, at the man who'd just turned her survival into a transaction. "How long?" she whispered. "Until we're even." She understood perfectly. Forever, then. Alfonso's inner sanctum turned out to be a converted server room on the vault's third floor, climate-controlled and humming with the white noise of expensive computing equipment. Maisie had expected dungeons and intimidation. Instead, she got Herman Miller chairs and triple monitor setups that made her former NSA workstation look like a children's toy. He'd given her access to everything. Financial records. Intercepted communications. Intelligence reports that should have required congressional oversight. It was either profound trust or a test to see if she'd run, and Maisie suspected it was both. What surprised her more than the technology was Alfonso himself. He didn't hover or micromanage. He brought her coffee at 3 a.m., black, no sugar, somehow knowing her preference without asking. When she'd solved a particularly nasty RSA encryption that his previous analyst had declared impossible, he'd simply nodded and said, "Show me how you did it," then sat beside her for 90 minutes, asking questions that proved he actually understood the mathematics involved. "You study computer science," she'd observed during their fourth all-nighter, watching him debug a vulnerability in his own security protocols. Carnegie Mellon. Dropped out junior year when my father had his stroke. He hadn't looked up from the code. The family business required different expertise. You could have hired someone else to run it. I did. They stole $40 million before I learned that delegation is just outsourcing your vulnerabilities. His fingers had paused over the keyboard. Intelligence is the only asset that can't be stolen, only shared. Everyone else I employ is either disposable or dangerous. You're the first person in a decade who's neither. The observation had unsettled her more than any threat could have. Because it was mutual. She'd expected a caricature, the violent, hypermasculine crime lord from film adaptations. Instead, she'd found a strategist who played four-dimensional chess with human lives, who read Machiavelli in the original Italian, who treated her insights with the reverence most men reserved for religious texts. He never commented on her appearance. Never let his gaze linger inappropriately. When other men in his organization made the mistake of addressing her as sweetheart or honey, Alfonso's correction was swift and glacial. Dr. Meller is here for her mind, not your entertainment. Disrespect her again and you'll be reassigned to sanitation detail in the stockyards. She'd stopped being a hostage somewhere around week 3. Now she was something far more dangerous. A collaborator. Maisie found the anomaly at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, buried 17 layers deep in what should have been routine financial reconciliation data. At first, it looked like a rounding error, microseconds of latency in transaction timestamps that wouldn't register on standard auditing software. But Maisie's pattern recognition had been honed by years of finding needles in haystacks made of other needles. She pulled the metadata, traced the packet routing, and felt her stomach drop through the floor. Someone had installed a siphon program directly into the Rizzo family's offshore accounts. Not a crude hack, but elegant code that mimicked legitimate banking protocols while redirecting 0.03% of every transaction to a network of shell corporations. Over 18 months, it had bled approximately $12 million without triggering a single security alert. The craftsmanship was exceptional. Almost beautiful. Which meant it wasn't some external competitor. Alfonso. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked up from the intelligence briefing he'd been annotating, registered her expression, and crossed the room in 4 strides. She walked him through it. The ghost transactions, the deliberately randomized amounts designed to avoid pattern detection, the routing architecture that suggested someone with administrative access to the family's banking infrastructure. When she finally mapped the termination points, they both stared at the screen in silence. All roads led to accounts controlled by Giancarlo Rizzo, Alfonso's cousin, his chief financial officer. How long? Alfonso's voice had gone quiet in a way that made Maisie's survival instincts scream warnings. Based on the code's compilation date, 22 months. But it's been actively draining funds for 18. Can you trace where the money went after Giancarlo's accounts? She was already running the query. The results materialized like accusations. Wire transfers to the Volkov organization, the same Russian syndicate that had been aggressively expanding into Alfonso's territories. Payments for encrypted communications equipment. Retainer fees for mercenary contractors. He's not just stealing from you, Maisie said quietly. He's funding your replacement. Alfonso's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of the rage she could feel radiating off him like heat from asphalt. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a contact, then stopped. Looked at her with something that might have been vulnerability if vulnerability were made of razor wire. If I move on this, there's no going back. Family blood gets spilled, and the other families will see it as weakness or opportunity. I need to be certain. I'm certain. He believed her. That was the terrifying part. Within 6 hours, Giancarlo Rizzo would vanish from Chicago entirely, and Maisie would understand exactly what kind of empire she'd become architect to. The message appeared during routine surveillance review, embedded in the timestamp metadata of camera feed 47B, the one monitoring the vault's south entrance. Maisie almost missed it. Would have if she hadn't been running her custom analysis software looking for more breadcrumbs of John Carlos' treachery. But there it was, hidden in the microsecond intervals between frames, a sequence that had no business existing in security footage. Prime numbers. Her prime numbers, specifically the personal encryption key she'd developed during her doctoral thesis and shared with exactly one person. Director Charlotte Vance. Her mentor. Her betrayer. The woman who'd tried to have Maisie disappeared when she'd threatened to expose Operation Nightfall. Maisie's hands shook as she extracted the full message, watching the algorithm strip away layers of steganographic concealment. The decoded text materialized on her screen like a ghost materializing in a mirror. Canary. I know where you are. I know what you're doing. We need to talk. The technology you're seeing in Rizzo's competitor networks? That's mine. Or it was, before someone stole my life's work and put it on the black market. You're the only person alive who can trace it back to the source. Meet me. Alone. Or I make a phone call and your brother learns exactly what his sister really did for a living. CV. The camera feed timestamp indicated the message had been planted 4 days ago. Charlotte had been watching her. Knew about Alfonso. Knew about Ethan. Had probably known for months and waited, calculating the perfect moment to apply pressure. Maisie pulled up the security archives, tracking Charlotte's digital signature through the vault systems. She found 3 physical visits over the past 6 weeks, each time disguised as a high-roller guest, each time positioning herself in camera blind spots that shouldn't have existed unless someone had provided architectural schematics. The woman had been studying her. Hunting her. And now she was offering collaboration wrapped in a threat. Alfonso appeared in the doorway as if summoned by her distress. His ability to read her had become uncanny. What's wrong? Maisie turned the monitor toward him, watched his expression shift from curiosity to cold calculation as he absorbed the implications. Your former boss wants a reunion, he said flatly. She wants me to find whoever's weaponizing her encryption protocols. Probably so she can eliminate them and regain control of her intellectual property. And if you refuse? She burns my brother's life to the ground and probably tips off federal authorities about my location. Maisie met his eyes. I built the algorithm she's talking about. I know its vulnerabilities. If she's telling the truth about it being stolen, then whoever has it now is effectively invisible to conventional signals intelligence. Alfonso's smile was predatory. Then I suppose we're going to that meeting together. The auction took place in a converted monastery outside Prague, where Gothic architecture provided appropriate atmosphere for the sale of digital apocalypse tools. Alfonso had secured invitations through channels Maisie preferred not to examine too closely. They'd arrived separately, him as a prospective buyer representing independent interests, her as part of the catering staff he'd arranged to have infiltrated. The irony of returning to a serving tray wasn't lost on either of them. You don't have to do this, Alfonso had said on the private jet over the Atlantic, watching her practice the vacant expression she'd perfected at the vault. I can pull you out. Hire someone else. No one else can recognize the source code on site. She'd adjusted the ill-fitting uniform, identical to the ones the legitimate servers wore. And no one else knows Charlotte's signature style well enough to find the kill switch she definitely embedded in it. The monastery's main hall had been transformed into a theater of criminal excess. Bidders occupied velvet chairs arranged in ascending rows, their faces obscured by masquerade masks that would have been laughable if the weapons being sold weren't so terrifying. Maisie moved through them with champagne flutes, her presence so aggressively unremarkable that eyes slid past her like water off glass. The item she'd come for appeared third in the catalog. Project Nightfall, her own creation, perverted into something monstrous. The auctioneer described its capabilities with the enthusiasm of a wine sommelier, real-time decryption of military communications, backdoor access to financial institutions, the ability to spoof biometric authentication systems. Everything Charlotte and her handlers had promised would only be used for national security, now available to the highest bidder. Current bid, 47 million euros. Maisie circled closer to the demonstration terminal where the source code was displayed on a holographic interface, supposedly firewalled and isolated. But she designed the underlying architecture. She knew its vulnerabilities the way a mother knows her child's lies. She stumbled. Deliberately. Champagne splashed across the terminal's input pad, non-conductive liquid, mixed with a mild corrosive she'd synthesized in Alfonso's lab. The auctioneer barked irritation in German. Security moved to escort her out. In the 4 seconds of chaos, her hand brushed the terminal's access port. The modified USB drive, disguised as a decorative button on her uniform, made contact. The malware Alfonso's team had built to her specifications began its silent infiltration. By the time security physically removed her from the hall, she'd copied 18 terabytes of data and planted a logic bomb that would detonate the moment someone tried to deploy the stolen technology. Alfonso met her eyes across the room, his expression carefully neutral. She gave the tiniest nod. Time to disappear. Alfonso found the encrypted partition on Maisie's laptop 3 days after Prague, while she was sleeping off exhaustion in the guest suite of his penthouse. He hadn't meant to invade her privacy. The system had flagged unusual network activity, old habits from years of paranoia, and he'd investigated with the clinical detachment of someone checking for threats. What he found instead was a meticulously planned escape route. New identity documents, already fabricated. Cryptocurrency wallets under aliases he didn't recognize. Flight manifests to Sao Paulo, then Auckland, then vanishing into nothing. Messages drafted to her brother, explaining without explaining, saying goodbye without admitting she was leaving. All of it timestamped for activation in 72 hours. She'd been planning to run. Had probably always been planning to run. Their partnership, their late-night conversations about Gödel's incompleteness theorems, and the philosophy of encryption, all of it had an expiration date he'd been too blind to see. The realization hit him like a bullet he hadn't heard coming. He was still staring at the evidence when she appeared in the doorway, drawn by some sixth sense that her secrets had been compromised. Her expression cycled through shock, resignation, and something that looked dangerously close to regret. "I wasn't going to just disappear," she said quietly. "I was going to finish the nightfall cleanup first. Make sure Charlotte couldn't retaliate against you or Ethan." How considerate. His voice came out colder than he'd intended. "A farewell gift before you evaporate." "What did you expect, Alfonso?" Her composure cracked, revealing something raw underneath. "You blackmailed me into this. My brother's safety in exchange for indentured servitude to a criminal empire. The deal was until we're even, and we're even now. I got you Charlotte's data. You got your revenge on Giancarlo. The transaction is complete. Is that what you think this is? A transaction?" The question hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Alfonso stood, crossed the space between them with the deliberate control of someone trying not to shatter. "I don't want a cryptographer, Maisie. I have a dozen people who can break codes. I want the woman who solves century-old ciphers on her fire escape because silence makes her brain itch. I want the person who explained quantum entanglement to me at 4 a.m. using poker chips because I admitted I didn't understand it. I want..." He stopped. Started again, quieter. "I want you to stay because you choose to. Not because I'm holding your brother hostage or because you're paying off some imaginary debt. Stay because what we've built here matters. Because you matter." Maisie stared at him, and for the first time since they'd met, Alfonso couldn't read her expression. "You're asking me to choose you over freedom. I'm asking you to consider that maybe they're not mutually exclusive. This is it. This is the moment that changes everything. A crime lord just asked a genius to choose him over freedom, and she's standing at the crossroads between running and staying. If your heart is racing right now, you understand what's at stake. This isn't just romance. It's about finding freedom in the most unlikely places. Make sure you're subscribed because what Maisie does next will redefine what partnership means in a world built on leverage and fear. The next scene is going to show you why sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The operation took 16 hours of sustained cyber warfare, executed from Alfonso's server room while Chicago slept outside the reinforced windows. Maisie had decided somewhere between Alfonso's confession and dawn that freedom wasn't about geography. It was about choosing your own chains, and she'd rather wear ones forged in partnership than solitude. So instead of running, she'd done what she did best. She'd weaponized information. The Nightfall source code from Prague became a scalpel in her hands. She reverse-engineered Charlotte's backdoors, mapped every installation of the stolen technology across criminal and governmental networks, and built a kill switch elegant enough to make her former mentor weep. Then she'd added her own improvements, logic bombs that would expose every organization that had purchased the illegal encryption tools, complete with financial trails and communications logs. "You're about to make a lot of powerful people very angry," Alfonso observed, watching lines of code cascade across her screens like digital rainfall. "Good. Let them be angry in prison." Maisie's fingers moved with surgical precision, deploying the malware through the same distribution channels Charlotte had used to sell the technology. The FBI's Cyber Crimes Division will receive anonymous packages in approximately 4 hours. Complete evidence of Operation Nightfall, Charlotte's black market dealings, and a very detailed list of everyone who bought her toys, including some of my competitors. Especially your competitors. She glanced at him, a rare smile playing at her lips. The Volkov organization just lost their entire encrypted infrastructure. They'll be deaf and blind for months. And Charlotte's superiors at the agency will have some very uncomfortable congressional hearings to attend. Alfonso moved behind her chair, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a touch that had become familiar over countless late nights. "And your brother? Witness protection gets a full exoneration file. He can have his life back. His real name, his real history." She executed the final command sequence. "I gave him freedom. Now I'm taking mine." The screens flashed confirmation. Across 3 continents, servers crashed. Encryption keys dissolved. Charlotte Vance's carefully constructed empire began its spectacular collapse, and the intelligence community discovered that their prodigy had left them one final gift: complete accountability. Maisie stood, turned to face Alfonso. Not as a hostage or an employee, but as an equal. "I'm staying," she said. "Not because you asked. Because I want to see what happens when a cryptographer and a crime lord decide to rebuild an empire on something other than fear." Alfonso's smile was genuine for possibly the first time in years. "Partners?" "Partners," she confirmed. "But I'm renegotiating my salary." "Name your price." "Transparency. No more blackmail. No more leverage. If I'm building your digital fortress, I do it as an architect, not a prisoner." He extended his hand. She took it. Outside, the sun broke over Chicago's skyline, and Maisie Mellor, former ghost, current genius, finally stopped running from the one thing she'd always been, exactly clever enough to translate power into choice. What an absolutely phenomenal journey we've just experienced together. Maisie went from pretending to be nobody to standing as an equal partner with one of Chicago's most dangerous men, and she did it all with her brilliant mind. If you loved this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of intelligence, power, and unexpected partnership. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And I have to ask, what was your favorite moment? When she decoded that first message? The confrontation with Alfonso? Or that final power move against her old mentor? Comment below and let's discuss. Your engagement means the world to me. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.